Raise your hand if you've ever fallen into the deep pit of binge-watching hoarders on a Saturday night. Here I am, a mystical dragon, sitting amongst my throne of gold coins. Except they aren't gold coins. They're variations of toaster ovens dating all the way back to the 1980s. Hoarding is more common than you think, and the human impulse to hoard has always existed. In mythology, dragons who hoard was used as a symbol of social interaction. Stepping outside the realm of TLC's hoarders, today we're going to go into a little bit more depth. To begin, we'll discuss what really is hoarding and how does it manifest itself into the brain, followed by the economic impact on the Great Depression, and finally, how hoarding has caused domino-like patterns on the COVID-19 pandemic. So really, what is hoarding? And more importantly, how does it manifest itself into the brain? Well, the American Psychiatric Association describes hoarding as the difficulty parting or getting rid of possessions due to a perceived need to save these items. For instance, I have a family member who finds it completely necessary to save an unholy amount of dollar store spa items. Lavender never gets old. Attempts to part with these possessions creates a considerable amount of distress and usually leads to the decision to save these items. Hoarding was first known in history in Dante Alighieri's The Inferno, an epic poem from the 14th century depicting a vision of hell with 9 circles, each circle gradually worsening in clutter. And I believe I witnessed one of these circles while passing the door to my 20-year-old brother's bedroom. In usual cases, hoarding stems off of other common mental illnesses, such as depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder. It can also be inherited, as it is generally believed that 85% of the diagnosed cases are passed down from generation to generation. Scientist Sanjaya Saxena describes hoarding as underdiagnosed and undertreated. Therefore, it's common for the diagnosed age to be over the age of 60. However, in other cases, the American Psychological Association found that after performing an examination on hoarders, those who experienced extreme scarcity in their early childhoods were more likely to become hoarders in the future. These aspects being poverty, lack of a parental figure, are generally events that shape their lives. Randy Frost, a professor in psychology, wanted to dive deeper into this subject. Frost studied the behavioral ideologies of hoarders and said that one of his clients showed him a bag full of bottle caps that she thought were beautiful. I know you may be thinking, what's wrong in finding beauty in a harmless bottle cap? When does a harmless collection become a borderline disorder? Well, as tragic as it may seem, those who hoard fail to associate their thoughts with their possessions. And when research was done to examine these behaviors, it was found that those who hoard have lower connectivity in brain regions associated with cognitive control and higher connectivity in the default mode network. In simpler terms, it meant that their brains were working solely on the inside rather than focusing on the outside world, almost taking the phrase into your head to reality. So we've discussed what hoarding is, but let's sweep into the past of hoarding and its connections to the Great Depression. In 1937, hoarding reached its peak. The Great Depression had dominated blue-collared and impoverished American citizens, resulting in a horde of hoarders. Hoarding played a large role economically on the Great Depression, and George Ford Smith, a writer for Mises Institute, hypothesized that the Great Depression brought hoarding and inflation to a center stage. And in 1932, former President Hoover noticed that people began taking their money out of banks and instead hoarding gold coins. Adena research professor Bradley can explain hoarding in the context of savings. When consumer confidence is down, spending drops, and households increase their savings if they can because they expect bad times ahead. Scott Herring famously wrote a novel about this issue called Hoarders, a novel about hoarding during the Great Depression. And he explained that the term hoarder referred primarily to the accumulation of wealth rather than trash. So before hoarding was known as a mental illness, your average 1920s hoarder was seen as rich and wealthy compared to someone who needs professional attention. This mindset was abolished in 2013 under the American Psychological Association when they finally coined hoarding as a mental illness. It only took scientists 80 years to draw this conclusion. The Great Depression led to a generation of hoarders of money and objects. As Brad and Ted Clance, both who carry PhDs in financial consulting, hypothesized that hoarding is a response to financial trauma. Behavioral structures that are formed to protect oneself from financial crises are usually passed down from children to grandchildren. So although I may ridicule my family members for hoarding expired Micanites from the early 2000s, maybe it's important to note that they have proper reasoning behind why. Finally, analyzing nowadays, hoarding during economic crises tied both the Great Depression and COVID times together. The U.S. National Library of Medicine can elaborate on this issue when they say that people who hoard and their anxiety can increase subsequent to quarantine and nationwide lockdown in response to the COVID threat. This statement is directly proven by Michelle Bradley with her article titled Hoarding in the Age of COVID-19. In simple terms, she explains that Americans responded to COVID in fear. Rather than hoarding gold coins in the same manner that the Depression citizens did, Americans now are instead pulling their money out of banks and instead into bonds. The International Monetary Fund issued a warning about the virus's economic toll, saying it was the worst downturn since the Great Depression. Physically speaking, however, hoarding of toilet paper and other medical supplies still dominate the charts as to unhealthy responses to economic downturns. I think we can all agree that it was pretty worrisome when the majority of shelves at grocery stores were empty and toilet paper was hard to come by. Well, as of August 29th, 2021, toilet paper was in stock by 86%, according to the Journal of Behavioral Economics. Although shortages of toilet paper decreased, retailers still struggle to supply consumers with the certain sizes, brands, and colors of toilet paper. This is in response to the shortage of practically everything, whether it be raw materials, human labor, or a simple can of soup. So we've discussed the economy, the depression, and practically everything under the sun revolving around hoarding. Remembering that dragon that would hoard gold coins and wealth, and sinners in hell would gather and clutter, hoarding is more important than society portrays it as, especially financially, materialistically, or emotionally. From the Book of Wisdom, hoarding can never end. For the heart of man always covets for more, his raging appetites consumed by the heavy graves of the sand. So whether it be wrappers and McDonald's cups, hoarding in society is inevitable, and it will always exist, especially in times of fear or crisis. So the next time you catch yourself binge watching hoarders on Saturday night, don't forget the purpose it has served in our society.